Namaste and welcome to the third session of Living Ayurveda. I hope that the insights provided in the first two sessions on Agni and Am have been useful and you've been able to put some of those teachings to practice. Today's session is on Prakriti. Prakriti means nature. As we discussed in the definition of health, health is the state where there is samadosha, that is, the doshas are in balance. Now, what are doshas? We use this term very often in Ayurveda, dosha, Prakriti. So, Ayurveda describes three doshas, that is, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. If you look at this picture, and if I were to ask you who is the healthiest of all, most people choose the second lady in the middle because she's kind of the average amongst all of them. And this is how we've been trained to think that that which is average is good or normal. And few would also choose the lady on the left because they feel thinner is better. And very few will say that the one on the extreme right, the heaviest one, is the healthiest. But if I were to tell you that actually all three of them are healthy, so let us understand this. This is Prakriti or constitution. This is our nature. That is something that we are born with. And this is the tendency we carry throughout our life. And we must aim to maintain balance in this. So the first lady has a Vata Prakriti. The second one is Pitta Prakriti. And the third one is Kapha Prakriti. And all of them are healthy. It's important that they maintain balance in this and they will remain healthy. But if there is an imbalance, then that can lead to disease. And as I said, Prakriti is something that you're born with. That's the blueprint you have at birth, which is determined by the state of the sperm of the father, the ovum of the mother at the time of conception, and also the intrauterine environment that is provided to the fetus. And so the net result is the Prakriti, which is determined at the time of birth. But if God were to ask you, what Prakriti would you want in your next life? You cannot change your Prakriti in this life, that is for sure. But if you were given a choice of what Prakriti would you like to have in your next life, because Indian philosophy believes in rebirth. So what would you choose? Most would choose again the middle one because that seems to be average. Some would choose the first one because they think to have a zero figure like that is good. But very few will choose the last one. And if I tell you that the healthiest or the strongest Prakriti to have is the last one, that is the Kapha Prakriti. So let us understand this. In modern medicine and modern age, we are all explained or made to understand that whatever is close to average is normal. But what is common may not always be normal. The first lady, who was the thin, light one, who was Vata Prakriti, actually is somewhere here on the lower side of the curve. So this is the body weight. This is mean weight. And as you see, this is the distribution in the population. So it's an inverted bell-shaped curve. And most people are around the mean. So this is what is called in statistical language as -1 standard deviation, +1 standard deviation. That is 34% of the population will be in this area and 34% will be in minus standard deviation, that is less than the mean. And so this adds up to 68%. And if you take two standard deviations, that is about 95% of the population will be in -2 and +2 standard deviations. So basically this means to say that most of the people are close to the mean, and this is what is considered to be as normal. But for a person who's a Vata Prakriti, going back to the previous image, the first lady here This is her Prakriti or constitution. This is her makeup, and which is maintained throughout life. So she will always be on the lower side of normal in terms of weight. So she'll probably be somewhere here, and this is normal for her. This is in relation to the rest of the population. Yes, she is low weight, but that's her normal. In the same way, the lady on the extreme right, the Kapha Prakriti, will be somewhere here in the curve, and that's absolutely normal for her because that's her norm, even though it is way above the average in the population. So, in India, we have varieties of mangoes, and there's a huge variety, and these are some of the favorite varieties. So, there's the Alfonso mango, which is round and plump and short. Then there's the Daseri mango, which is actually slender and long. And then you have the Langra, which is different. You have the Totapuri, which is pointed at both ends and pretty long. Now, no matter how much you manure the plant or water it, the Totapuri will never change into an Alfonso. Similarly, the Daseri can never become plump like the Alfonso. So this is nature. And just like we accept the different varieties in the mangoes as being natural, that is the different innate nature of that product. So in the same way, we must accept the changes or the varieties or the different prakritis that exist in our physical body. So Bhagavad, which is one of the three classical textbooks of Ayurveda, says that Nityam Hit Ahara Vihara Sevi, that is the one who always has food that is Hita. Hita means beneficial. So the ahar, that is the diet, should be beneficial and the lifestyle should be beneficial. Now, the question arises, what is beneficial? Something that is beneficial to me may not be beneficial to you, both in terms of diet and lifestyle. So we often see this. Certain things suit some people very well and they don't suit other people. So to understand what is beneficial and what is not, we have to understand Prakriti or dosha, because we have different Prakritis and therefore different things are either suitable to us or not suitable to us. Now, everything in nature is made up of the five elements. From the heaviest to the lightest, we have earth, water, fire, air, and space. Ayurveda postulates that the human organism, or any living organism for that matter, exists in a balance of the five elements, and any imbalance causes disease. So the first heaviest element is earth, lighter than that is water, and these two combine to form kapha. So we can imagine kapha as being wet clay, earth plus water. So if you keep this in mind, you'll understand the various properties or attributes of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Next is water and fire. So predominantly fire and some water. These two combine to form Pitta. So this can be imagined as hot steam. And then we have the two lightest elements, air and ether. They combine to form Vata. So you can imagine this as moving air. So this is how we understand Tridosh, or the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Vata is the wind element. Pitta is known as bile in Chinese medicine, and the equivalent of Kapha is phlegm in Chinese medicine. So as we said, Vata is space and air. So this is to do with the energy of movement. Any movement that happens in the body is a function of Vata. So moving the limbs, walking, moving the hands, speaking, all this is a function of Vata. Even the involuntary movements, the beating of the heart, the breathing, the peristalsis in the intestines, all this is governed by Vata. So if Vata is balanced, all these functions happen in a coordinated manner. But if there is excess of Vata or there is an imbalance, these functions will be imbalanced. The next is Pith, which is a combination of fire and water. And as we know, fire is to do with the energy of transformation. And the most important fire in the body is the digestive fire. So, Pitta is responsible for digestion and also metabolism. All metabolic processes involve transformation of molecules from one to the other, and that is a property of fire. So, transformation, metabolism, digestion is governed by Pitta. Again, when Pitta is balanced, all these processes happen in a balanced manner. And when there is an aggravation of Pitta, when there is an imbalance, then there is a disturbance in these functions. Then there is Kapha, which is formed by water and earth. And so this actually forms the building blocks of the body. And this is the energy of structure and lubrication. So all these three are important. You cannot have survival without Vata, without movement. You can not have survival without Pitta, which is the energy of transformation and digestion. And the very basic structure of the body and immunity is governed by Kapha. So all three are important and they all have their own functions. So when we talk Prakriti, even though each body has all these various elements, the proportion of these elements varies. And so when there is a predominance of the wind or the Vata element, it is known as a Vata Prakriti. Similarly, when there is more Pitta, it is known as a Pitta Prakriti, and so on for Kapha. So the 10 pairs of opposites, or these 10 properties, or gunas as they are called in Sanskrit, that characterize every substance in nature. So you could have something that is heavy as opposed to something that is light. Something could be dull, whereas the other could be sharp. Some substances are slimy, the others are rough. Some are dense, some are liquid. Some are hard, some are soft. You have cold versus hot, unctuous versus dry, cloudy versus clear, stable versus mobile, and gross versus subtle. So Vata, Pitta, and Kapha all have different properties. So let's take a look at those. So Vata, as we said, is basically moving air. So if you just imagine moving air, it is dry. So if you put out a cloth, a wet cloth, in a place that's windy, it will dry up. So that's because of the drying effect of the air. Similarly, as we already discussed, Vata is made up of air and ether. These are the two lightest elements. So Vata is light, it is cold, it is rough, and very importantly, it is subtle and mobile. These two properties make Vata, in fact, special and also notorious at times. And we'll discuss that in a while. So, in fact, the only element which is mobile is Vata. There is a verse in Ayurveda which says that both Pitta and Kapha are lame, that is, they don't have limbs to walk, and they are driven by the force of Vata. And the analogy that is given is that of clouds. So the clouds may be laden with moisture, but wherever the winds take them is where they will shower their rain. So that's the importance of Vata. And Vata can drive Pitta and Kapha to different places and actually create havoc in the body if it is out of balance. Pitta is fire, and so it is hot, it is sharp, light, and liquid, and it is oily. And especially when there is arm, it tends to have a fleshy smell. So if any of the body secretions have a fleshy smell, it's usually because of Pitta. So people who sweat a lot, sometimes the sweat has that typical fleshy odor, and that is because of Pitta. Then there is Kapha. Kapha is the heaviest of the three. It is made of earth and water, which are the heaviest elements. So definitely heavy is the first most important property. Then there is slowness, because if you place wet clay on the table, it's not going to move. If there's a strong draft of wind, it will move the clay, but on its own, because it is heavy and slow and it has the static energy. So this inertia or static energy is an important property of kapha. And also it is cold and damp and dense. So let's see how these properties translate to our physical body. So discussing vata first, the first lady, as we discussed, was Vata Prakriti, and Vata is made up of ether and air. And because these are the two lightest elements, such individuals who have Vata Prakriti are lean and thin. Their body weight is usually on the lower side, and they have prominent veins. Also, because Vata is dry, so they have dry skin and hair. They need to apply oil or moisturizers regularly, otherwise the skin gets very dry, and also the hair has a tendency to be dry. They have small eyes, and the Ayurvedic classical texts describe them to have a dark complexion. If we try to understand this in the Western continents, where we have fair skinned people, so usually an excess of Vata or a Vata imbalance will lead to hyperpigmentation. So often you see people who have pigmentation here in the cheek area, in a butterfly pattern, or will have pigmentation on the knuckles, or pigmentation near the ankles. So all these represent an increase of Vata. Similarly, because air is drying, so such individuals tend to have cracking joints because the lubrication in the joints is minimal. And so they have weak cracking joints and they are prone to aches and pains. Ayurveda says that pain in the body is always because of Vata, whether it's a headache or a stomach colic or backache. Whenever there's an increase in Vata, it leads to pain. Then there's inconsistent hunger and thirst. If you've seen a fire, if you have a tiny fire and you have a strong draft of wind, what happens? Either, depending on the direction and the force of the wind, it can blow out the fire, or it can set it ablaze and it can increase its proportion. In the same way, when there is a Vata imbalance, the hunger, which is because of the fire, the digestive fire, can either be put out or it can be intensified. And so such individuals have inconsistent hunger and thirst. So this inconsistency is a very particular property of Vata. Often we see patients with high blood pressure who have very fluctuating blood pressures, inconsistency, sometimes very high blood pressure and sometimes very low blood pressure. Similarly, in diabetics, they might have fluctuating blood sugars, sometimes very high and sometimes very low. The blood sugar may be shooting up to 400, 500 milligram per deciliter, and then might be going into hypoglycemia at times. So this fluctuation is usually due to Vata. And if we don't control the Vata element, this is usually not fixed. Then such individuals have very poor reserves, as you can see. So they cannot undertake fasting very easily. And whenever they have ARM, we must be careful in prescribing a mild fast and not a very, very strict fast, because they have minimal reserves. And in fact, excessive fasting or starvation can lead to an aggravation of Vata. And the tastes that they usually prefer, which are actually beneficial for them, are salty, sweet, and sour. So the body usually craves that which is the requirement. So whatever we lack, we crave for that. And this is actually a healthy craving. And as long as the body does not have too much ARM, most cravings of the body are healthy. But when the body accumulates a lot of arm, the cellular intelligence is disturbed, and then we tend to have cravings that are not healthy and are actually counterproductive. Then, because has a cool property, air is cooling, therefore these individuals prefer warmth, both external warmth and internal warmth. So, external warmth, they like to be in a warm surrounding. They will not like the air conditioned, uh, very cold air conditioned rooms. And they have a tendency to developing cold extremities. Also, they prefer warm food. And they usually sleep very light and they have a tendency to awaken very easily. This is their normal tendency because Vata is to do with movement. So there is movement also in the brain, and we'll be talking about the different types of Vata. So they sleep lightly, and when there is a Vata imbalance, it can go to the degree of insomnia or sleep disturbance with a lot of dreams and disturbing dreams. Ayurveda also describes the type of dreams one has in different conditions. So the typical dream of Vata imbalance is a dream of insecurity. You might have had that dream where you're running to catch the train or the bus and you just miss it every time, or you're late for the exam, and or sometimes you're just falling from a height and you just keep seem to be falling, and there's a you're just falling in air. So all these dreams are Vata aggravated dreams. And these individuals, again, due to the movement, which is a special property of Vata, it is mobile and subtle. So due to the movement, they are talkative. Again, just like the activity in the brain is movement, so they have a tendency to have a talkative nature, and they like to be active. Again, a property of movement, and it can be very hard for them to sit still, especially in a state of Vata imbalance. They have low physical endurance and immunity. So, in fact, this is the Prakriti which has the lowest immunity and endurance. Um, so, as I said in the beginning, if you have a choice to choose your Prakriti in your next lifetime, you don't want to choose Vata because this has the lowest immunity and endurance. Again, due to the movement, these individuals can learn very quickly and also forget very quickly. So, long term memory is not very good. And the Vata disorders that they are prone to usually begin with constipation. So, most Vata individuals are prone to constipation, again, because of the dryness. Air causes drying. And just like they have dry skin and dry hair, uh, the stools or the feces tend to get very dry and hard. And so they're prone to constipation. And this constipation will lead further to an increase in Vata in the system, and which will manifest as arthritis, aches and pains, and nervous disorders. So when Vata is in a state of balance, all our functions are well balanced. And when there is imbalance, there are different problems which we just discussed. So Vata or Vayu, as it is called, can be classified into 5 types depending on the location in the body and also the function. So the first one is Vata, the Apan Vata or the Apan Vayu, which is located here in the pelvis. So the direction of movement is downwards. So this is the downward moving force, which is responsible for elimination of waste. It is responsible for defecation, urination, menstruation, childbirth. So these are all the downward movements. And if it is balanced, all these functions happen in a well coordinated, effective manner. But if there is imbalance, it could lead to constipation or it could lead to explosive diarrhea, usually with a lot of sound. And there could be urinary retention, there could be painful menstruation, and childbirth will be difficult if there is poor Apan Vayu. Next is Saman Vayu or Saman Vat, which is located in the belly. It is responsible for digestion, and so it is here in the center of the belly, responsible for peristalsis and effective digestion. If it is balanced, we have good digestion, and if there is an imbalance, it can lead to poor digestion. As we already discussed, it can put out the fire, it will lead to inconsistent hunger, sometimes too much, sometimes too little, lead to bloating in the belly and a lot of gas. The next is Vyan Vayu, which begins here in the heart region and is responsible for circulation throughout the body. So if you have good circulation, you have good Vyan Vayu. And if there is an imbalance of the Vyan Vayu, it will lead to poor circulation. So if you have postural hypotension, when you get up from the sitting position suddenly, and you tend to have a blackout, or if you have cold extremities, cold hands and feet, that usually will represent poor functioning of the Vyan Vayu or an imbalance in the Vyan Vayu. The next is the Udan Vayu, and Udan Vayu is the upward moving Vayu. So it begins from the diaphragm here and moves up towards the head. This is responsible for speech and articulation. And so if this is balanced, we have good, coordinated, clear expression. If there is an imbalance, then we tend to have interrupted speech. There could be eructations, there could be hiccups, and so on. Then there is Pranavayu, which is in the head and neck region, and which is responsible for our thoughts. And if it is balanced, we have good, clear thinking. And such individuals who are of Vata Prakriti can actually be very imaginative and creative because of this good Pranavayu. But if it is in a state of imbalance, it could lead to a lot of irrational thinking, illogical fears, insecurity, insomnia, and excessive dreaming, disturbed sleep, and so on. And this pranavayu is also responsible for the movement of food inside. So we take in through the pranavayu. So ingestion of food, breathing in air is a function of pranavayu. So to sum up, pranavayu is in the head and neck region. It is the inward moving direction. Udan vayu moves up from the diaphragm up to the throat, and it's a very important vayu in sadhana, in our spiritual progress. Then there is samana vayu, which is present in the small intestine, which is responsible for digestion, and which is also related to viveka, that is discrimination or discernment. So if there is a disturbance in the saman vayu in digestion, it also reflects as a disturbed viveka or discernment in our psyche. And then there is apan vayu, which is the downward moving vayu in the pelvis, and then vyan vayu, which begins at the heart and is responsible for circulation. So the pulsation in the body is a function of vyan vayu. Coming on to pit. Pit is a combination of fire and water. So it's like hot steam. And this is somewhere in the middle. So vata is very light. Kapha is on the other extreme with earth and water very heavy. So pitta is in the middle. So such individuals are of medium build, symmetrical, and usually have excessive sweating because of the fire element. And because this fire element is strong, it kind of burns the hair follicles. So the hair is usually thin, and such individuals are prone to baldness and early graying. They have joints of medium strength, and they have a very strong appetite because the fire is responsible for the appetite. So they have a very strong appetite, and therefore they cannot tolerate fasting. So they need to eat at regular intervals because they have a strong fire. And the tastes that are preferable are sweet, bitter, and astringent. So These are the three tastes that they usually prefer and which are also favorable to them, unless they have arm, which will cloud the cellular intelligence and then cause uh, abnormal taste preferences. And they usually prefer cold temperature because pith is heat, it is fire. So they prefer cold ambient temperature and also cold food. Their sleep is usually peaceful and moderate, and they prefer to arise early in the morning because before the sun rises, it's good for them to arise early in the morning, and that's their preference. They have moderate speech and usually very clear expression, again to do with the sharpness of the fire element. And such individuals are usually very purposeful and intense and can be brilliant because of the fire that's burning bright in them. And they like being efficient and in control. They have moderate speed and action, and they will complete their task well, and they're quick in making decisions, again, because of the sharpness of the fire. They have moderate immunity, so it's in between that of Vat, which was very low, and Kapha, which is strong. But they have low tolerance and they're quick to get angry. So the word that is used in Charak Samhita, which is the classical textbook of Ayurveda, to describe an individual with Pitta, Prakriti, is Asahishnu. Asahishnu in Sanskrit means intolerant, and this is their special property because the fire is strong, and fire, as you know, has a very sharp, penetrating quality, so they tend to be intolerant. And a name for Lord Vishnu in the Vishnu Sahasranam, that is the text which talks about the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu, is Sahishnu, means tolerant. So divinity is tolerant and Pitta is intolerant. So intolerant means that they are intolerant to hunger. So if they're hungry, they need to be fed promptly. If there is a delay in eating, then it can lead to irritation, irritability, headache, acidity, and so on. Similarly, if they are sleep deprived, they can present with the same kind of symptoms of pitta aggravation, with acidity, with irritability, with headache, and so on. So, and also they can be intolerant towards other people and certain behaviors. So, I have Vata Pitta Prakriti, and often when I get into my Pitta mode, uh, my mother will tell me that you need to develop some tolerance. And then I often joke with her and I tell her that, look, I am a Vata Pitta Prakriti. And Prakriti is something that is given to you by nature, it is given to you by your parents. So it is determined at birth and it's something that cannot be changed. So that's my nature. You just have to accept it. But jokes apart, Ayurveda says that all the physical needs of the body should always be attended to promptly, but all the mental tendencies that arise because of imbalance should always be controlled skillfully and wisely. So, a Pitta individual has a tendency uh, to be hungry and should be provided food when he is hungry. So, that physical need must be promptly attended to. Otherwise, it will lead to an increase in pitta, an imbalance which will lead to headache, acidity, irritability, and so on. But at the same time, if there is an excess of pitta, there is a tendency to be irritable, there's a tendency to be judgmental, there's a tendency to be critical and to get angry. But that should always be kept under control. So we must always exercise control over inappropriate emotions and inappropriate behavior, mental behavior. Whereas the physical needs should always be taken care of and provided for. Then, what are the disorders that a Pitta individual is prone to? They are those which have excessive heat, like acidity, ulcers, disorders of the skin and hair, Gout, which is high uric acid. So gout, high uric acid is an example of a condition which has a lot of pitta and arm. And you will see that the joint is inflamed, it is very red and tender to touch. Then high blood pressure, liver disorders, all these are manifestations of pitta aggravation. Again, pitta is classified into 5 types depending on the location and the function in the body. So the most important pitta that we all know is the pachak pitta, which is the digestive pitta, which is located in the belly with the enzymes, the hydrochloric acid of the stomach, and it is responsible for digestion, absorption, and assimilation of nutrients. Then we have the ranjak pitta. Ranjak in Sanskrit means color. And this is the pitta which gives color to the blood, the red color. So this is present in the liver and spleen and responsible for the bile secretion and the color of the blood. Then we have the alochak pitta, which is the pitta in the eyes, and this is responsible for optical perception and also gives color to the eye, and this is responsible for the pigmentation in the iris and in the retina. Then we have the sadak pitta, which is the pitta present in the brain, which is responsible for our thinking, learning, and understanding. So this is the fire in the brain. And then we have the bhajak pitta, which is the pitta in the skin. So the skin has a fire, an energy of metabolism. So if you apply oil on the skin, as we do in an oil massage, when we rub oil over the skin, it gets absorbed into the skin. And that is because of the fire that is present in the skin. And so herbs and oils will be absorbed through the skin. So if there is poor Agni, in the skin, it will lead to arm. Application of oil or an oil massage will lead to arm formation when there is poor Bhajak Pitta or poor Agni. So massage, an oil massage is contraindicated in conditions of poor Agni. For example, fever. When you have fever, you should not do an oil massage. Or when you are having diarrhea or any other condition, when you have a lot of phlegm in the chest. These are all conditions which have poor Agni and arm. And so oil massage should be avoided in such situations. Kapha is the heaviest element and made of earth and water. And such individuals are usually stockily built. They're well built with a bright skin that remains cool because kapha is damp. And they usually have very thick, dark, curly hair. They have large, beautiful, lustrous black eyes, described to be very beautiful. That's what Charak Samhita says, that they are the most beautiful of all the 3 Prakritis. And they have strong joints that don't crack because they have good lubrication in the joints. Even though they are big, they have very meager appetite and thirst, and they can easily undertake fasting. They prefer pungent, that is spicy taste, astringent, and bitter taste. And these are the 3 tastes which are actually good for them. And so they like spicy crisps, chutneys, that is sauces that are spicy, and hot food, both in terms of temperature and spicy food. And they tend to be have excessive sleep, which is quite deep and sound. And I have a tendency to being lazy, especially when there is an excessive accumulation of kapha or an imbalance. This laid back nature can actually go towards laziness. And their speech is also usually very soft, slow, with pauses. And they tend to have a deep, sweet voice. And it's easy for them to sit in one place because of this inertia that they have, the static energy. But they usually complete their tasks with patience and perfection, though slowly. They have the maximum immunity, strength, and tolerance, and usually have a lot of love and compassion. They're peaceful, thoughtful people, intelligent, and knowledgeable. So this is actually described to being the healthiest and the strongest Prakriti, both physically and mentally. And the disorders that they are prone to when they have excess, because we know excess of anything is bad. So when there's excess of kapha, it leads to cough, cold, obesity, high cholesterol, itchy skin. In fact, itchiness anywhere in the body, especially when it's moist itchiness. So that is usually due to excess of kapha or So often we have children who come with itching around the perianal region, and the stool test does not show any worms or parasites. And even after a clinical trial of antiparasitic or worm medication, deworming medication, the itching doesn't go. It keeps coming again and again. And this is because of So unless the digestion is corrected, unless the kapha imbalance is corrected, that itchiness doesn't go away. Similarly, with thrush or fungal infection, which could be either in the oral cavity or in the vaginal cavity or anywhere in the body, or also wet, itchy, eczematous skin lesions, which ooze out fluid, are all because of excessive kapha. And so we need to correct the kapha imbalance, take care of the digestion, and that will help to correct the itchiness. Similarly, diabetes, again, is a condition of excessive kapha, and hypothyroidism. So hypothyroidism is a condition of low metabolism. It's a hypometabolic condition, and there is low fire. And so this is again a condition of kapha. Now, kapha is also classified into 5 types depending on the location in the body and the function. So Shleshak kapha is the kapha in the joints, the synovial fluid, and that lubricates the joint spaces. And such individuals who have a kapha prakriti have good lubrication, have strong joints. But if there is an excess of kapha, so that means there is an imbalance, usually it means there is it could lead to rheumatoid arthritis, where there's fluid accumulation in the joint space. And so that is Then there is the Kledak cuff, which is the lining of the stomach mucosa, and which is actually protective. And so it protects the Pachak pit or the digestive fire from burning the stomach lining. And so if this Kledak cuff, this mucus lining is depleted, then the Pachak pit, the digestive fire, will burn through this and cause ulcers and acidity. Similarly, if there is excessive Kledak cuff, that could actually lead to too much mucus. And often we see patients who complain of mucus in the stool. So that means that there is excessive kapha, which is usually a manifestation of And then there is avalamba kapha, which is present in the lungs, so and the cardiac tissue, so basically in the chest area. And this is should also be balanced. If it is depleted, it will lead to a condition like interstitial lung fibrosis, where there is drying of the lung tissue. And if there is excess of kapha, it will lead to a lot of phlegm and actually lead to too much phlegm, and it could lead to expectoration and diseases that are associated with a lot of mucus. Then there is the Bodhak cuff, which is the kapha present in the oral cavity, which is responsible for the taste, sensation, and perception of taste. And if that is disturbed, so if there is or excessive kapha, it leads to excessive salivation and an altered or a deranged sense of taste. So with the COVID pandemic, we are told that it leads to a loss of sensation of taste. And that's basically a manifestation of Then there is Tarpak kapha, which is the kapha present in the brain, in the white matter and the myelin sheaths. So when there is demyelination, all conditions which have demyelination, where there is loss of the myelin sheath, it signifies that there is a loss or degeneration of kapha. And that's usually due to increase in bath. So when there is an increase in bath, there's usually simultaneously there's a simultaneous decrease in kapha because Vata is the wind element and kapha is the damp or moist element. And so excessive wind will dry up the kapha, and so that will lead to demyelination. So, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha all are important in the body, and each of them has a specific function. And depending on the location in the body, they are classified into 5 types. And for the individual to function, for the organism to function in a healthy way, all these three should be balanced. And an imbalance will lead to a disturbance of the function. So, with Vata, if there is a disturbance of the Anvayu, it leads to cold extremities, it leads to postural hypotension, it can lead to palpitations. Similarly, if there's a disturbance of the Samanvayu, it will lead to bloating of the belly. And if there's a disturbance of Apanvayu, it leads to constipation, and so on. Now, the Manas Prakriti is often, Western texts will often correlate the mental Prakriti with the physical Prakriti. But actually, Ayurveda says that the Manas Prakriti is different. And the Manas Prakriti is the mental Prakriti, which is classified into Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. So, Sattva is basically purity, Rajas is activity, and Tamas is inactivity or inertia. So, as we already discussed, the physical constitution or the physical Prakriti, the Deha Prakriti, will determine our physical needs and what is beneficial to us in terms of diet and lifestyle, and what is not favorable to us. But it does not always correlate with the Manas Prakriti or the mental constitution, which is something that can be cultivated by practice. And that is why yoga or the understanding of this we can change our Manas Prakriti. So we can develop or cultivate Sattva. And but as Ayurveda says, that we must always provide the physical needs of the body, and we must always try to create more Sattva and not give in to the tendencies of the mental Prakriti. So, when there is an imbalance in the Deha Prakriti, when there is an accumulation, say, of the Pitta dosha, there is an excess of the fire element, there will be a tendency towards intolerance, towards anger, towards being overcritical and judgmental. And so all that should be controlled through the will. And similarly, an excess of wind element or vata will lead to a feeling of insecurity, irrational fears, and we must try to create a state of balance both in the mind and in the body. So by controlling the external factors of diet and lifestyle, we will reduce or create balance in the different doshas, and that will also affect the state of our mind. So this was about Prakriti, and in the next session, we will understand how we can create balance or how we can prevent imbalance in our bodies. So see you in the next session soon with more about the different doshas and Prakriti.